Sarah adjusted her wedding dress one final time, the ivory silk cascading around her like morning mist. Through the bridal suite window, she watched black SUVs arriving in the church parking lot, their occupants moving with unmistakable military precision. Her father's voice drifted from the hallway, already holding court with relatives about his successful business ventures and his daughter's simple military job. She closed her eyes, remembering the weight of stars on her shoulders just yesterday, the briefing room where she'd commanded operations that her father would never comprehend. Today, she was just his little girl playing dress-up in what he called her weekend warrior uniform. Her mother entered quietly, carrying the family pearls. Behind her, Uncle Frank was already complaining about all the uniforms downstairs. Too many military types for a simple wedding, he grumbled. Sarah's lips curved in the faintest smile. If only they knew. The church bells began to chime, and somewhere below, she heard the distinctive sound of polished boots on marble floors. Her wedding day was about to become something far more significant than anyone expected. Where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there as we begin this remarkable wedding day story? The church doors opened to reveal rows of guests, but Sarah's breath caught at the sight before her. Nearly half the congregation wore dress uniforms, their ribbons and decorations catching the afternoon light streaming through stained glass windows. Her father stood at the altar, his face already showing confusion at the unexpected military presence. Commander Johnson from her last deployment caught her eye and nodded almost imperceptibly. Behind him sat Captain Martinez, whose life she'd saved in Kandahar. 3 rows back, Master Chief Peterson adjusted his white hat, the same man who'd once told her she had the finest tactical mind he'd encountered in 30 years of service. Her father whispered something to the minister, gesturing toward the uniformed guests with obvious irritation. He'd wanted a simple ceremony, he'd said repeatedly. Nothing fancy, nothing that would overshadow his own accomplishments in the community. Sarah's maid of honor, her college roommate Lisa, leaned close. "These are all your friends from work?" she asked quietly. Sarah simply smiled, her hand steady on her bouquet as the wedding march began. The aisle stretched before her like a parade ground, lined with men and women who knew exactly who she was. Her father's bewildered expression told her he was beginning to realize this wasn't the simple military gathering he'd expected. Have you ever been to a wedding where you suddenly realized there was so much more happening beneath the surface? Sarah walked down the aisle with measured steps, her father's arm trembling slightly beneath hers. He kept glancing sideways at the uniformed guests, his confident smile wavering as he recognized the insignia of elite units. Navy SEALs, Special Forces, Marine Raiders. This wasn't the small gathering of weekend reservists he'd expected. At the altar, her groom Michael stood proudly in his own dress blues, a Navy lieutenant whose eyes shined with admiration as she approached. He knew exactly who he was marrying, had known from their first meeting at the Pentagon briefing room where she'd commanded the attention of generals. The minister began the ceremony, but whispered conversations rippled through the military section. Sarah caught fragments. Fallujah operation. Congressional medal recommendation. The youngest ever to. Her father's face grew increasingly pale as he began to piece together what he was hearing. Behind them, more uniformed personnel continued to arrive, filling the remaining pews with quiet efficiency. Master Sergeant Williams nodded respectfully, the same man whose unit she'd extracted from an impossible situation in Syria. Colonel Harrison sat ramrod straight, still remembering the day she'd saved his career with a single strategic decision. Her father squeezed her hand tighter, not from emotion, but from dawning realization that his daughter's simple military service might not be so simple after all. The ceremony continued, but the real revelation was yet to come. As Sarah and Michael exchanged vows, her father found himself studying the faces around him with growing unease. The military guests weren't just attending a wedding. They sat with the rigid posture of soldiers paying respect to a superior officer. Several had tears in their eyes as Sarah spoke her vows, as if witnessing something far more significant than a simple ceremony. During the ring exchange, a late arrival caught everyone's attention. A distinguished older man in full dress uniform entered quietly, his chest heavy with decorations. Sarah's breath hitched almost imperceptibly as Admiral Thompson took a seat in the back row. Her commanding officer had come personally, despite being stationed halfway around the world. Her father leaned toward her mother, whispering urgently. "Who are all these people, Margaret? I thought she just worked some desk job at the base." Her mother shrugged helplessly, equally bewildered by the sea of uniforms and the reverent atmosphere surrounding their daughter. Michael slipped the ring onto Sarah's finger with practiced precision, his own military bearing evident to those who knew what to look for. The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and as they kissed, a barely audible whisper of approval rippled through the military section. The ceremony was complete, but Sarah knew the real test would come at the reception when her father inevitably made his traditional speech about family accomplishments. Today, those words would carry weight he never intended. The reception hall buzzed with an unusual energy as guests found their assigned tables. Sarah's father had insisted on traditional seating arrangements, placing family at the head table and relegating what he assumed were Sarah's work friends to the back. He had no idea he'd just seated some of America's most decorated warriors behind the wedding cake. At Table 7, Navy SEAL Commander Brooks shared war stories in hushed tones with Air Force Colonel Davis. Both men had served under Sarah's command during classified operations that would never appear in any public record. Their respect for her was absolute, their presence here a testament to bonds forged in combat. Sarah's college friends chattered nervously at Table 3, increasingly aware they were surrounded by military elite. The bride's roommate Lisa kept stealing glances at the uniformed guests, finally whispering to her boyfriend that something felt different about this wedding, like they were witnessing history rather than just celebrating love. Her father stood near the bar, regaling his business associates with stories about his daughter's simple military career. "Just a glorified secretary," he chuckled, swirling his whiskey. "Gets to wear a uniform and feel important, but it's really just paperwork and weekend drills." Behind him, Master Chief Rodriguez's jaw tightened as he overheard the dismissive words about the woman who'd personally led the rescue mission that saved his entire platoon. "What's the most surprising thing you've ever discovered about someone you thought you knew completely?" The dinner service proceeded with military precision, though Sarah's father remained oblivious to the significance. He'd moved from table to table, introducing himself as the father of the bride, consistently describing his daughter's service as basic military work, nothing too demanding or dangerous. At the head table, Sarah maintained her composure with the same discipline that had carried her through enemy fire in 3 different theaters of operation. Michael squeezed her hand supportively, knowing how much her father's dismissive words stung, especially in front of the warriors who'd followed her into impossible situations. General Peterson, seated strategically near the family section, listened with growing displeasure as Sarah's father launched into another deprecating story about her weekend warrior duties. The general remembered the briefing where Sarah had single-handedly redesigned the entire Middle East strategy, earning unanimous approval from the Joint Chiefs. Captain Williams approached the head table, ostensibly to congratulate the couple but actually to pay quiet respects to his former commanding officer. Sarah's father intercepted him with characteristic bluster, explaining how proud he was of his daughter's simple clerical position, completely missing the captain's barely concealed shock at such ignorance. The military guests exchanged increasingly tense glances as the evening progressed. Their admiral was being publicly humiliated by her own father, and their collective restraint was wearing thin. Have you ever watched someone unknowingly disrespect a person who deserved nothing but honor? The moment arrived when Sarah's father tapped his champagne glass, calling for attention. The reception hall fell silent with unusual speed, military discipline creating an atmosphere of expectancy that he mistook for normal wedding courtesy. He stood confidently, prepared to deliver his traditional father off the bride speech. Sarah felt her stomach tighten as her father began with his usual boasts about family achievements. He detailed his business successes, his community leadership, his son's law practice, building toward what she knew would be a patronizing dismissal of her own accomplishments. Around the room, 200 uniformed guests sat in perfect stillness, their collective attention focused with laser intensity on the man who was about to publicly humiliate one of America's most distinguished military leaders. Several senior officers exchanged meaningful glances, their hands resting unconsciously near their sides in positions of barely restrained attention. Her father's voice grew more animated as he approached the section about Sarah. "My daughter decided to serve her country in her own small way," he announced with condescending pride. "Nothing too dangerous or important, just basic military work that lets her feel useful while keeping her safe at some desk job." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the civilian guests sensed something had shifted dramatically in the room's atmosphere. When have you felt the tension in a room become so thick you could almost touch it? Sarah's father continued his speech, emboldened by what he perceived as rapt attention from the audience. He chuckled as he described his daughter's military service as playing dress-up on weekends, completely unaware that his words were landing like physical blows on the warriors surrounding him. "I'm proud that Sarah found a way to contribute without putting herself in any real danger," he declared with paternal smugness. "She gets to wear the uniform and feel important, but thankfully it's just administrative work. Nothing that would keep a father awake at night worrying." Master Chief Thompson's hands slowly clenched into fists under the table, remembering the night Sarah had personally led the extraction team that brought his wounded squad home from behind enemy lines. 3 tables away, Colonel Martinez stared straight ahead with military bearing, but his jaw worked silently as he recalled Sarah coordinating airstrikes while under direct fire. The father raised his glass higher, approaching his crescendo. "So here's to my little girl, who found her own safe way to serve while the real heroes do the dangerous work. May she always stay behind that desk where she belongs." The words hung in the air like a challenge thrown down before an army. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 200 pairs of eyes upon her, knowing that her father had just crossed a line from which there would be no retreat. The reception hall existed in a moment of absolute stillness, as if the entire room held its collective breath. Sarah's father stood with his champagne glass raised, expecting applause for his heartfelt speech about family pride and his daughter's safe military career. Instead, he found himself facing a sea of stone-faced uniformed guests whose silence carried the weight of impending judgment. Sarah sat motionless at the head table, her training allowing her to maintain perfect composure even as her father's words echoed in the charged atmosphere. Michael's hand found hers under the table, his grip conveying both support and anticipation of what was about to unfold. Admiral Thompson rose slowly from his seat in the back, his movement catching the attention of every military person in the room. The 5-star admiral who commanded respect from presidents and foreign dignitaries stepped forward with deliberate precision, his dress uniform gleaming under the reception hall lights. Behind him, as if responding to an unspoken command, chairs began to scrape against the floor. One by one, uniformed figures throughout the hall started to stand, their movements creating a ripple effect that spread from table to table with military synchronization. Sarah's father looked around in confusion, finally sensing that something momentous was happening but completely unable to comprehend what he had set in motion with his dismissive words about the woman these warriors knew as their leader. Admiral Thompson's voice cut through the silence like a blade, carrying the authority of decades of command and the weight of absolute respect. "Admiral on deck," he bellowed with ceremonial precision that instantly transformed the wedding reception into something resembling a military parade ground. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. 200 uniformed personnel snapped to attention in perfect unison, their chairs scraping backward as they rose as one body. Navy SEALs, Marine Raiders, Air Force pilots, Army Special Forces, all standing at rigid attention with their eyes fixed on Sarah in a display of military honor that shook the very foundations of the reception hall. Sarah's father dropped his champagne glass, the crystal shattering against the floor as his face went white with shock. His mouth opened and closed wordlessly as he stared at the sea of America's finest warriors paying homage to his daughter. The woman he'd just described as playing dress-up was receiving a salute reserved for the highest levels of military command. Sarah herself remained seated for a moment, overwhelmed by the unexpected tribute from her brothers and sisters in arms. Slowly, with the grace that had carried her through countless command decisions, she rose to acknowledge their salute, her wedding dress suddenly seeming as dignified as any dress uniform. The civilian guests sat frozen in stunned silence, finally understanding they were witnessing something far beyond an ordinary wedding celebration. What would you do if you suddenly realized you'd been completely wrong about someone's true importance? Admiral Thompson stepped forward, his voice carrying across the silent reception hall with commanding authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "you are in the presence of Admiral Sarah Mitchell, one of the youngest flag officers in United States Navy history and recipient of the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism under enemy fire." The words hit Sarah's father like physical blows. Admiral. Navy Cross. Heroism under fire. Each revelation shattered another piece of his constructed reality about his daughter's simple military career. Around him, the uniformed guests remained at perfect attention, their collective presence now making terrible sense. Admiral Thompson continued with formal precision. "Admiral Mitchell has led classified operations across 3 theaters of combat, saved countless American lives, and earned the respect of every warrior in this room through her exceptional leadership under the most dangerous circumstances imaginable." Sarah's mother gasped audibly, her hand flying to cover her mouth as the magnitude of her daughter's hidden achievements crashed over her. The business associates who'd been listening to patronizing stories about weekend warriors now sat slack-jawed, realizing they'd been in the presence of military royalty. Master Chief Rodriguez stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. "Admiral Mitchell personally led the rescue operation that brought my entire platoon home when we were surrounded and outnumbered 10-1. She saved 23 lives that night, including mine." The room erupted in a thunderous display of respect as 200 voices shouted in unison. "Huya Admiral." Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone's true greatness was finally revealed to those who never saw it? Sarah's father stood trembling among the shattered remains of his champagne glass, tears streaming down his face as the full weight of his daughter's sacrifices became clear. The woman he'd dismissed as playing dress-up had been commanding America's most elite warriors while he'd been boasting about business deals and community awards. He stepped forward on unsteady legs, his voice breaking as he spoke directly to his daughter for the first time that evening with the respect she'd always deserved. "Sarah, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. I never understood what you've been carrying, what you've been protecting us from knowing." Admiral Thompson nodded approvingly as Sarah embraced her father, her forgiveness as immediate as her command decisions had always been. The assembled warriors began to relax from attention, but their reverent atmosphere remained as they witnessed the reconciliation between father and daughter. Michael stepped beside his new wife, his own pride evident as he addressed the room. "Today I married not just the woman I love, but one of America's greatest military leaders. She's been protecting all of us while asking for nothing in return except the chance to serve." The reception erupted in sustained applause as the military guests cheered their admiral, finally able to publicly celebrate the woman who'd led them through impossible missions. Sarah's father joined the applause with tears in his eyes, clapping for the daughter he was finally seeing clearly. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that heroes walk among us every day, often unrecognized and asking for nothing but the chance to serve something greater than themselves.